Welcome everybody and good evening from Europe to the United States, where it's morning. Good morning, Warren Hill. Good evening, Kjaerbo. It's a pleasure for me to introduce you to Warren Hill and Kjaerbo, our two faculty members talking about Hill-RBF, more data for more refined outcomes this evening. Warren Hill has been the medical director of East Valley Ophthalmic in Mesa, Arizona for the past 35 years. He's specializing in consultative ophthalmology, challenging anterior segment surgery for other ophthalmologists, and he is the original author of the Hill-RBF 3.0 formula. He's also teaching all over the world and author of many articles. So I would like to welcome here Warren Hill tonight with us in Europe. Kjaerbo is the medical director of the Scandinavian Eye Center in Copenhagen. He also acts as a consultant at the ophthalmology department of the University of Copenhagen, and he's one of the medical advisors on the development board for Hill-RBF 3. I would like to welcome him also here on board for this tonight's session. We're going to have a pre-recorded session first, which we did earlier this year, which is going to be followed by a few additional slides on latest published data on Hill-RBF 3.0 by Warren Hill, and follow-up is going to be a live Q&A session. So I would like to have all your attention for this very interesting information on Hill-RBF 3 and talk to you later. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And a big thank you to Haag-Streit for the invitation to share with you what I think is some pretty exciting developments in the area of intraocular lens power calculations. And right now it's no mystery to anybody that artificial intelligence is working its way into pretty much everything that we do, and IOL power calculations are really no exception. Hard to imagine, but we're already up to version 3 of the RBF method for lens power calculations. And what we're going to do today is I'm going to give you some background as to how this works, how it was developed, and where we're going in terms of accuracy and the range of calculations that we can do with this. So really, as anterior segment surgeons, for really any given surgical plan, how can we really be the most effective? In other words, what do we want more than anything? Well, we want to avoid complications. And when we think about complications for cataract surgery, you know, the standard list comes up, you know, posterior capsular tear, vitreous prolapse, IOP spike, perhaps a dislocated IOL, CME, retained lens fragment, TAS, heaven forbid, endophthalmitis. But when you think about it, an unanticipated refractive outcome, small or large, is really the most common complication following routine cataract surgery. Now, fortunately, most of the time, this doesn't result in a lens exchange. But if you think about it, it's the one place where we probably have the least confidence with current technology. So said another way, it's pretty much the elephant in the room. And that elephant in the room, every time we go into the operating room, is IOL power selection. So as anterior segment surgeons, we're primarily being judged by our patients and our peers by our refractive outcomes. So what are some accuracy standards, and should what's most common be good enough? And I'm here today to tell you that it shouldn't be. So let's look at 5 well-known studies. There's a National Health Service study by Gale and his group, the Han study in the Journal of Ophthalmology, the Swedish Registry study in Journal of Cataract Refractive Study, the Kaiser study in ophthalmology, and then the Haggis Formula Optimization Database, which now is up to about 300,000 eyes. For the half diopter accuracy, things kind of settle around 78%. For the 1 diopter accuracy, about 98% is what we're seeing. And for those of you that take the time to track your outcomes, this number 78% should seem very familiar. And in some ways, it's a limitation of technology, and in other ways, it has to do with how we do the measurements. So right now, in the year 2021, this is the gap that we're looking to close rather. If we drill down just a little farther in the Haggis Formula Optimization Database, really less than 1% of surgeons are at 92% for the plus or minus half diopter accuracy. About 6% of surgeons in that database are at 84%. And as I mentioned, the vast majority are about 78%. So graphically, if you look at a 78% accuracy, it looks like this. And if we're implanting, the Restore or the Symphony or Toric IOLs, I think we need to do a little bit better. I think we all would be in agreement in that regard. So let's go back in history a little bit and talk about where we've been, and that way we can better understand where we're going. This is the original Vergence formula from the German mathematician Friedrich Gauss from 1840. And as we all remember from our training as ophthalmology residents, the object vergence plus the lens vergence equals the image vergence. So fast forward to a few years ago, and this is your typical IOL power calculation formula. And it should look familiar. Lens vergence equals image vergence equals object vergence. It's still a Gaussian formula. Now, the problem with this type of formula is that the power of an intraocular lens within the eye is relative, not absolute. So if you have a 21 diopter lens and it sits closer to the cornea or more posterior from the cornea, its relative power changes. We know that as the effective lens position. And the main difference between most Vergence formulas is how they determine the effective lens position. So the corrective estimation of the effective lens position is one of the main determinants of IOL power calculation accuracy. Now, some of the more recent Vergence formulas, like Graham-Barrett's Universal 2 formula, really do a very good job with this. But his formula is more like a calculation method than a regular formula that you could write down on a single piece of paper. The older formulas from the 90s and early 2000s really fall short in the estimation of the effective lens position. And as we all know, the effective lens position can only be estimated. It can't be accurately calculated because it's based on things that are unknowable. So that's a real limitation for lens power calculations. So just by way of demonstration, here's a database of about 3,400 patients. We'll use the SRKT formula. There's our half diopter accuracy. There's our accuracy outside half diopters. And again, half diopter accuracy in the 70% range, 70 to 80% is very, very common. Now let's just take that same database and we're going to fit it to an artificial intelligence model. There's our half diopter accuracy. These are the cases outside. So you can see that just that exercise alone demonstrates the amazing versatility of this particular approach. So what we're going to talk about today is pattern recognition by artificial intelligence. It's one of many forms of artificial intelligence that we can use. And really, artificial intelligence is everywhere. I don't think you can get through 3 or 4 hours of your day without artificial intelligence impacting part of what you do. And think about when you got your iPhone, you took it out of that white box from Apple, and one of the first things it asked you to do is to show it your fingerprint so it could recognize who you were. So you put your fingerprint on the home button and you did it a couple more times, and it would gather more and more information. And basically what it was doing was it was taking your fingerprint pattern and it was assigning all the metrics to it that are used for identification. So this is a form of pattern recognition that's, at least in our society, is almost ubiquitous. The pattern recognition is used in medicine as well. If you think back to when you were a resident or an intern and your attending asked you to identify a rhythm strip, you would look at it and you'd be looking at a pattern. And we had, atrial fibrillation and bundle branch blocks, all this sort of stuff. Well, here's a V3 lead from a patient who has something called T-wave alternans. And T-wave alternans is a millivolt variation in the bottom of the T-wave from one beat to the next. And if that variation is more than a very, very tiny amount, it can be a marker for sudden cardiac death. So now our very sophisticated EKG machines are interpreting rhythms using artificial intelligence. So let's get down into things that are a little bit more complicated, and I'll show you the basis for what we do for lens power calculations. So here we have a box, and inside this box, are 1,000 seemingly random input vectors using something called a Manhattan distance generator. And a Manhattan distance generator generates points as though you were driving across a city, Manhattan, for instance, but you couldn't go through the buildings, you had to go around the buildings. So it kind of looks like a stepwise pattern. And these points were put inside that box using the Manhattan distance generator. So here we have, say, a schematic of a city, and this would be the Manhattan distance with us driving around the buildings, and this would be the Euclidean distance with us flying as the crow or the bumblebee flies. So for this exercise, we're going to give the artificial neural network 5,000 tries to come up with the underlying pattern. So here we are at about 120 cycles, a little bit more, about 500 cycles. And by the time we get to 5,000 cycles, we've actually uncovered the underlying pattern of all these little dots inside the box. So think of the enormous power of this technology to recognize patterns and relationships that normally would be invisible to just the casual observer. So why not IOL power? Well, using pattern recognition for artificial intelligence has some amazing advantages. First, it's highly sophisticated, and it can do outcomes optimization based solely on data. And as we all know, manual optimization methods limit possibilities to what we already know. We know what we know and we move in that direction. And sometimes we need something that's completely new to take us in a different direction. And this is well suited to real-world problems where ideal models are not available. And IOL power calculations is the poster child for this sort of situation. It's also self-organizing, as we just saw. It has the ability to create novel, unique representations of the data and has very enhanced sensitivity for identifying and unraveling complex nonlinear relationships. And it's free of calculation bias. If you think about the number of possibilities we have for eyes of pretty much the range of human anatomy for axial length, central corneal power, anterior chamber depth, it's about 680 million combinations. And no Virgin's formula, no regression algorithm is going to be able to do that. So we need to move to a higher level of mathematics. So let me walk you through how we develop a real-world artificial intelligence calculator, the steps that are involved, and where this has taken us. So first question is, what measurement should we use? Well, of course, we should probably use the axial length and anterior chamber depth, central corneal power, but are there other things that matter? Are there other relationships of which we may be unaware? And we start out by taking 13 different measurements, and Doug Koch and Lee Wong at Baylor University and I came up with 13 different measurements. And it's the usual things, plus things like 6 millimeter spherical aberration, gender, age, a number of things. And we want to see, we'll throw them in the hopper here and we'll see which one works best. And we use a genetic algorithm which employs principles of evolutionary iterative factor selection process. So we make a basic model and we modify this in a semi-random fashion, creating new models. And then the best performing models are identified, retained, and ranked. And we do this again and again and again. And with today's computers, you can do this at amazing speed and at amazing depth. So the process gets repeated, and then we identify which factors are most important. And of course, the axial length is one of the most important, the central corneal power, the anterior chamber depth. But we also found that the outcome turned out to be very important and for a given IOL power. And as we looked at these 13 different factors and went through them extensively, we found that again, the axial length, central corneal power, anterior chamber depth, the refractive outcome, and the given IOL power were really what we needed. And we could fit this data set to almost a 98% accuracy. We also held out 20% of the cases and then ran them through. These are cases that were naive to the process of making the calculation. And that accuracy was at 90%. So what that told us was that we were on the right track and we were moving in the right direction. So during the process of evolving this, we can look at different markers for how well we're doing. This is early in the process. This is called an optimized response surface model that's used in engineering. And you can see that there's it's got a sort of a lumpy, bumpy appearance, and we needed to make some improvements. And as we went through different methods of using artificial intelligence, you can see that it evolved and evolved and evolved, and the accuracy got better and better until we had almost a perfectly smooth, optimized response surface model. And for this, we used radial basis functions as the activation function of the artificial intelligence algorithm. So next, we need to fit real-world big data to the artificial intelligence model, so we know what we need as far as factors, and now we need lots of data. So the way we do this is we ask our ophthalmic colleagues around the world to help us. And here we have 44 participants in 24 countries in North America, South America, Europe, Africa, the Middle East, India, Asia, and Australia. And these are volunteers who very generously have donated their time and their cases. And many of these physicians represent some of the most accomplished cataract surgeons in the world, and certainly for their respective countries. So we're very grateful for their help and continued support. So how do we make a calculator? Well, basically we have our data now, and we know what we want to use. So we developed this organized pattern of data. We run it through the artificial intelligence algorithm and apply our activation functions. In this case, it's a radial basis function. It's just a method. It's an engineering-based statistical model that allows us to come up with the right answer. And we have lots of options. We can use Gaussian process methods, Kriging, stochastic process methods. This just happened to be the one that worked best for us. We calculate the difference between this output layer and the fitting data set. And then there's a backward propagation phase where we can run things through again and again until the accuracy doesn't improve. And then from this, we can develop a calculator. Now, this is from a very early effort of about 800 or 900 cases. We were able to take a cloud of data and turn it into a straight line. And as we look at our half diopter accuracy, first thing we noticed was that there was no calculation bias. It doesn't matter if it's a long eye or a short eye, bizarre anterior chamber depth or anterior segment values, it's simply a pattern. So one of the problems with Gaussian methods was completely leapfrogged over. We could get straight to the answer by pattern recognition. And another tool that engineering has taught us, and it's never been used in ophthalmology before, but we decided to use it with this, is something called a boundary model. And for any pairwise model, in this case, this is central corneal power against axial length, we can create a boundary model where we sample the edge for known accuracy. And in this case, this is the 90% accuracy boundary model for the keratometry and axial length. We can identify those cases that are outside the boundary model. And what this means is that a case with this data point, if that patient had this data point, we couldn't predict the accuracy at a 90% level. 90% is an arbitrary value, but it was way above what anybody had ever seen before, and it seemed to make sense to us. So once we had version 1 finished, based on 3,400 cases, we decided to do a prospective evaluation. And it's 459 cases from 3 study centers. These are consecutive surgeries, no editing, wide range of IOL power, axial length, anterior chamber depth, central corneal power. And what we found was pretty much exactly what we predicted, that for all eyes, we were about 90%. And using the boundary model, that's what it predicted. For normal eyes, a little bit better. Axial myopia, of course, is always going to be better because the lens power is very small, and variations in effective lens position don't matter as much. And a big surprise was axial hyperopia. 84% for axial hyperopes is very, very high. And this was very encouraging early on. So this was back in 2006, almost 4 years ago. Other people began to evaluate what we did. This is Roman's group from 2017 at ASCRS. And you can see that when you use the cases that have an inbounds calculation, he got exactly what we got. So it holds up. So let me just share with you how these boundary models work and how this has an impact on how you will use the RBF formula in daily practice. So this is version 1, again, based on about 3,400 cases. We're going to take an eye that's a little bit of an axial myope, but some normal Ks and normal anterior chamber depth. And you can see that for the 6 pairwise boundary models that we use to generate an inbounds or out of bounds flag for the user, we're right in the middle. We have lots of data. We can predict that we're going to have a good outcome. Now let's take an unusual case. Here's a very long eye, an axial myope, and we're going to get some pretty steep Ks. In fact, we don't have data for a patient like this, so it's out of bounds. We're going to have a shallow anterior chamber depth. And we don't have data for this, so it's an out of bounds calculation. So for a very long eye with a shallow anterior chamber and very steep Ks, that's pretty unusual. And in the beginning, we didn't have enough data. We only had 3,400 cases. So let's go to version 2. Version 2 was based on about 12,400 cases. And now we've expanded our boundary models, which means we can have improved inbounds calculations. We're going to take a longer eye, 28 millimeters, or long eye rather, 28 millimeters. And here's that very steep cornea. This is the patient we looked at just a minute ago. And you can see that now it's an inbounds calculation. Our shallow anterior chamber depth now becomes an inbounds calculation because we have enough data to support the calculation for half diopter accuracy at a 90% level. So as we increase both the amount of the data and the quality of the data, the inbounds calculations increase as well. So let's turn our attention to version 3, and that was released just last month. And we're very excited about this because this is the culmination of about 2 years of additional work to bring the RBF calculation method to this level. So here's a boundary model set up for version number 3, and we're going to have a very unusual eye. It's an extreme axial myope, 32 millimeters, very flat Ks, very steep, a very deep anterior chamber. And take a look at all the data points. They're all within the boundary models. So we've expanded both the depth and the breadth of our boundary models. Now, Haag-Streit has made available an online calculator with version 3. This is at rbfcalculator.com. It's open to anybody. There's no charge. And you can go to the website. You can click on, what is this? And it will take you to an explanation of what it is we're doing. And then if you're as geeky as I am and you like to get down into the math, you can go to an explanation of exactly what's taking place. You can enter the calculator, and through really enormous generosity on the part of Haag-Streit, they made this available to users of all biometers, not just the Lenstar. So if you have the Movu Argos or Almaster 700, the Tomei OA 2000, or the Lenstar, you can also use this, and it will accept data from those. Put in the patient information, the biometry and the target refraction, some information about the IOL, including its lens constant. And then what it will give you is a calculation with the inbounds or out of bounds calculations. And in this case, we're up to about 34.5 diopters, and we still have enough data to support that calculation. Okay, so as you use a calculator, you may notice that for the exact same IOL power, some cases will give you an inbounds indication. Other cases will give you an out of bounds indication. Excuse me. And it has to do with the data entered. Are these data points within the boundary models? Excuse me. Our team has optimized lens constants for most of the popular IOLs used in Europe, North America, Australia, India, and throughout Asia. And you can go to the website and it will give you optimized lens constants for all of these IOLs. So just a little summary. In March of 2018, we released version 2. Again, that was based on about 12,000 eyes. We took the power down to about -5 using meniscus lenses. Greatly expanded the boundary model, as you saw. For version 3, again, we've expanded the boundary model. We now reliably go up to 34 diopters, and in some cases as far as 36 diopters. And we have improved accuracy for unusual anterior segments. And for this, you enter the central corneal thickness, the white to white, the lens thickness, and also gender. When you have large enough databases, you can begin to pick up subtle differences like this. And it turns out that gender actually does matter for a series of patients. And of course, a greatly expanded boundary model. Just an example of how much of an improvement version 3 is. This is a very short eye. You can see for version 2, the calculation, all the calculations are out of bounds. That's the red indication. All the calculations for version 3 are inbounds. For an extreme axial myope, only some of the calculations are inbounds, and now all of the calculations are inbounds. So we're seeing a greatly increased number of inbounds calculations. Prior to the release, as is typical of Haag-Streit, we did a very extensive evaluation of this. And this is close to 10,000 cases from a number of our different study sites around the world. And what we found was that for most databases, version 3 gave a 1 to 2% improvement in the calculation accuracy for a series of patients. So adding the additional parameters and using this updated artificial intelligence model with this expanded boundary model really does make a difference. Now, one last thing to think about is something we haven't really considered in the past, and our eyes from all ethnic groups the same. Our Caucasian eyes and Chinese eyes the same, and it turns out they're not. And if you talk to people who implant premium IOLs in Shanghai or Hong Kong, Singapore, Taipei, with Chinese populations, they use different formulas than we do because the anatomy of these eyes are different. And anybody who's ever practiced ophthalmology, say in Asia, knows about the incidence of angle closure amongst Asian eyes. The anterior segments tend to be smaller and a little bit more shallow, and this influences lens power calculations. Now, unfortunately for the Chinese, all of the lens power calculation methods have been optimized based on European databases. And it turns out that, again, Caucasian and Chinese eyes may not be the same. And now we have the mathematical tools with the increased sensitivity to be able to pick up these differences and start making calculators specific for certain population groups. We have a long range study underway in mainland China, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Taipei, and we're collecting data. And in the future, hope to have an artificial intelligence calculator specifically for the ethnic Chinese eye. So the future of ophthalmology is experiencing a convergence of technologies for IOL power selection accuracy. In other words, we're getting better, and we're getting better by different methods. We have ray tracing, artificial intelligence, intraoperative aberrometry, and really advanced versions formulas like the Barrett Universal 2 formula, which I think we all would agree that for theoretical formulas, this is the very best. And the method that gives the greatest sensitivity and flexibility is probably going to be the winner of the game, the one that does the best job. And I'm proud to say that Haag-Streit is strongly committed to research in this area. So we know that 78% is what's most common, and if you track your outcomes, this will be a number that will look very familiar to you. We know that 84% is acceptable. This would be the next tier up of physicians. But 90% or even better, 92% is actually achievable with these new calculation methods, and also taking very good care with your measurements for things like service optimization, validation criteria, etc. So once again, this is 78%. This is 90%. And the goal of the project such as this is to make it so we don't have to worry about the spherical equivalent. Those of you who are as old as I am probably remember when we went from ultrasonography to the measurement of axial length by optical biometry. We really stopped worrying about the anteriors, about the axial length. And my hope is that we can do that with IOL power selection as well. And that elephant that's in the room, that's always with us, always a concern, especially for unusual eyes, will eventually fade away, and we can begin thinking about other things that are more important. So thank you for your attention, and let me just briefly introduce my friend Kjaerbo from Denmark. And as mentioned, he's the medical director of the Scandinavian Eye Center in Copenhagen. And he's had 5 years of training as a general ophthalmologist and also subspecialty training, cataract and refractive surgery, and also glaucoma. And these days, there's kind of a convergence between glaucoma and cataract surgery. He's a consultant to the eye department at the University Hospital of Copenhagen, and he does about 3,000 lens-based cataract surgeries per year and refractive procedures. This is an enormous surgical volume, and we're very pleased to have Dr. Kjaerbo share his experience with artificial intelligence.
Thank you very much. I want to thank Haag-Streit for inviting me to share my experience with the Hill-RBF. I've used it now for about 3 years, and I'll just go through our experiences and our workflow. So these are my disclosures. I have no financial interest in any of the products mentioned. So the Hill-RBF. As you've heard, there's some quite advanced underlying mathematics. I have to admit, even though Warren has tried to explain these things in detail, I haven't really fully understood everything. But to borrow a point from Mike Snyder, do you really need to know the intricate details of a combustion motor to enjoy driving a car like this? And I think not, and I think that's the same thing with the Hill-RBF. As long as it drives and you're enjoying it, I think that's what you need. So this is a method, a calculation method, right? It's not a formula, purely data-driven by artificial intelligence. It's self-validating. It's the first method with quality feedback on the reliability of the calculation with the inbound and out-of-bounds statements. It's constantly evolving, which is one of the key things I really love about this method. As we've heard, the initial version had around 3,400 eyes. Version 2.0 was over 12,000 eyes, and now we have a highly refined data set of over 30,000, which is really, really impressive. Sorry about that. So beforehand, we would use, with the older calculation formulas, we would use different formulas for different eyes. Short eyes would be one formula, long eyes would be a different one. With the Hill-RBF, we know that it performs equally well in any eye. So, like I was saying before, it's self-validating, and for somebody like me or my staff, it's really, really safe to use, because when we look at the printouts, we look at the prediction of the measurements, and we get a quality measurement, which will say whether the measurement is inbounds or out of bounds. If it's inbounds, we know that with a very high probability, around 90%, we'll be within plus minus half a diopter. If it's out of bounds, which is going to be very rare now, as I understand with the 3.0, we know that there's some very special things going on, and we have to really be careful. So it's one formula for all eyes. It improves the confidence in the prediction, and we have a better safety with unusual cases. And that leads me to our experience and our workflow. So just to start from the basic, we do tear film analysis on all our patients, and we optimize the ocular surface when needed. So we use artificial tears, lid scrub, warm compresses, and if there is signs of meibomian gland disease, we will use IPL as well. We use the Lenstar, obviously, and we find that it's a very reliable tool. It's really quick. It's a one-click measurement that gives us a lot of data. Very closely spaced keratometry spots, keratometry spots, sorry, a very high precision on the biometry, and a very flexible measurement technique. So our staff is highly trained in validating the measurements and changing or re-measuring if needed. So when you look at the measurements, so if you look at the biometry, you can see that you have the different spikes, and you can go in and move the calipers if you need, if the quality of the measurement is not at par with what you want. You can go in and remove any measurements you want to delete, and then just sit back with the high quality measurements. Same thing goes, oh, sorry, this is the printout, and this is where you see whether the measurement is in bounds or out of bounds. So with white-to-white measurements, again, you can go in and move or resize the reticule. So you have a high precision. I'm sorry about the slides here. I don't know why they're running away from me here. Anyway, again, with keratometry, we have these spots that we can actually look at the actual quality of the measurement, and if it's a bad quality or unclear spots, we can go ahead and delete and do new measurements, and until we are satisfied with what we see. My initial results, these were back from 2018 when we had our first 53 cases we looked at. This was presented earlier. We compared the Hill-RBF with the Olsen formula, which was the main formula I was using at that time. And we can see that with the version 1.0 of the Hill-RBF, we had 83% within plus minus half a diopter. With the Olsen formula, we hit 78%. And then when we went to the version 2, we were over 90% within 0.5 of a diopter, which was actually the main thing that drove me towards using this formula as my main formula. And that's how it is today. We have now looked at 671 prospective cases, and we are still over 90% within that plus minus half a diopter, which is very satisfying for us. And it gives us great safety. Our staff is really, really happy when they get the patients in for the post-op evaluation. It's overall very satisfying. Good. So this, in summary, in our experience, the Hill-RBF calculation method is for all eyes, independent of its biometry. It improves our confidence with the calculation parameters, with the in and out of bounds statement. And it enables us to identify unusual cases at a glance, and it's constantly evolving. So this is still, and going to be for a long time, our preferred method of IOL calculation. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Warren. Thank you, Hadi, for this very, very enhancing information on Hill-RBF 3.0. I would like to hand over the word again to Warren Hill to add a few more lines on just published data on the Hill-RBF 3.0 and its performance.
Okay, let me just tell the participants tonight what we found. And there's an article that's coming out in the Journal of Cataract Refractive Surgery in 1 to 2 months. It's online right now, and you can Google it. The title is Evaluating the Prediction Accuracy of the Hill-RBF 3 Formula, and it's by a group in Israel. And what it shows is that for their data set, a moderately large data set, the half-diopter accuracy of version 3 is now the most accurate of any method currently available. And it was an astonishing 95% for this group. The Barrett Universal 2 formula, again, as we mentioned, one of the the very best theoretical formula was 92. Version 2 of Hill-RBF was 90. And then the emmetropia validating formula from Singapore was 91. And the Kane formula was 91. So what we're seeing right now is that version 3 actually is offering something of value. And we're finding that it is consistently 1 to 2% better for any series of patients. Doug Koch and Li Wang at Baylor University are now recommending that the standard deviation for outcomes be the standard by which we look at formulas when we evaluate them. And the standard deviation for this was 0.266 diopters, which is very, very low. By comparison, Barrett was very close at 2.82, a little bit higher. Version 2 was 2.85, and the Kane formula was 2.87. And so what we're seeing is independent confirmation and validation of the fact of what we've been seeing during the validation process as we develop this formula, in that it is better. And one thing I might mention is that once we get above 90% for the plus or minus half diopter accuracy, all improvements are painfully incremental. And this has to do with measurement technology. I think we're reaching a biologic floor and a calculation ceiling, in that with current technology, the measurements can only be so accurate. So just like we saw when we went from 10 megahertz A-scan ultrasonography to optical biometry, the calculation accuracy jumped up. I think we're going to need something similar for keratometry in order to see that next bump in calculation accuracy. We have the tools now to do a very good job for the calculations. It's just that we have, we're limited in terms of what we can do for our measurements. And we're looking forward to industry to help us in that regard.
Thank you very much, Warren. Let's have a quick look at the Q&A section. There's one question that came in, and that's on the new parameters. How would you rank the importance of the new parameters of Hill-RBF v0?
Sure. Well, what this does is it opens up some new options for us. Occasionally, all of us will see eyes with unusual anterior segments, say a small white to white and a deep anterior chamber, big lens thickness, I mean, things that we normally don't see. And all of these parameters, whether it be keratometry, axial length, anterior chamber depth, lens thickness, white to white, they do follow a distribution. And occasionally we're going to see things come up in odd combinations. So by adding these additional parameters and adjusting our modeling process to include these, now these cases are less likely to be outliers. And what you'll find with version 3, as Hadi mentioned, is that the number of out-of-bounds indications you're going to see is much less, because the boundary models have been greatly expanded and refined. And as Hadi mentioned, this gives you a heads up that the case may not give an exact outcome. And this is an important discussion to have with patients. If you can say, Mrs. Jones, we did your measurements and we see that you have an unusual eye. God has given you an unusual eye. So just know that we may not get the kind of accuracy that we want because of the parameters that we got before surgery. The rule is, if you tell the patient beforehand, it's not your fault. If they find out afterwards, you kind of own it. So I think this is a step in the right direction and giving us more tools with which to work.
Thank you very much, Warren. There's a question headed to Hadi. How did the use of Hill-RBF change your way to plan your surgeries, and did it also influence the choice of implants? Hadi, you're muted.
There we go. I'm sorry. You hear me now? Okay. So what I was saying is, So initially, we had our full staff trained in using the Hill-RBF with the Lenstar. And as soon as we did that, everybody actually felt very safe doing the measurements and evaluating the measurements. So again, because of the in and out of bounds information on the measurements, everybody felt very safe. And again, it's very easy to see when once you have an unusual case, then you take the right precautions for that. So I would say safety. And then the other thing is precision. We're very happy to consistently be over 90% within the half diopter of our goal. So that's very satisfying.
Perfect. Thank you, Hadi. There's another question, I guess, that goes to both of you, because you both mentioned the importance of the optimization of ocular surface prior to taking measurements. And the question is, how much does the optimization of the ocular surface improve your outcomes? Do you have any numbers or any feel about that?
Yeah, I can begin with that. First of all, I live in the desert, so everybody here in the southwestern United States, has some form of dry eye. And what we used to find is that there would be measurement-to-measurement inconsistencies with the keratometry. Adi Abulafia at a hospital in Jerusalem did a very interesting study where he took normal, healthy volunteers. He did keratometry, and then a few days later repeated the keratometry, and the keratometry was different. So what we found is when we optimize the ocular surface with lid scrubs, warm compresses, frequent use of artificial tears for 1 to 2 weeks prior to biometry, that measurement-to-measurement variation went away. Also, if you look at a topographic axial curvature map, all those little flat and steep islands that you see that represent an unstable ocular surface, they go away also, and the topography looks more normal. So I think one of the reasons we see variation in keratometry from one measurement to the next is the status of the ocular surface. And as patients get older, the meibomian glands can play a role. So the warm compresses, helps to express the meibum from the meibomian glands and stabilize the ocular surface. So it was enough of a sea change for us that we decided to make this a normal part of our biometry routine. And Hadi, you had mentioned something similar.
Yes, I mean, so after we started using the Hill-RBF, as I've spoken to Warren about a couple of times, we get ambitious. We want to get our numbers even higher. We would love to be high up or in the mid 90s within the half diopter. And what Warren always tells me is that, the surface is very important. For us now, it's also a routine. We do a tear film analysis on all our patients, and then we treat them accordingly. So we start out with optimizing the tear film, again, a week or two prior to surgery. If it's a severe case, we will go even more into depth in treatments, maybe IPL or something similar.
Perfect. Thank you very much. There's another question that came a few times, actually, and I guess I can also pose this to both of you. Are you still using other formulas, or are you just relying on Hill-RBF 3.0 now?
Well, I can begin with that. Basically, if we see an out-of-bounds indications, we're going to use a second formula just to see. And our go-to formula would probably be Barrett. All the out-of-bounds indication tells you is that we don't have the proper breadth and depth of data to do the calculation at a 90% accuracy. One interesting thing that Doug Koch observed, and we found as well, is for the hyperope. In the beginning, we would frequently be seeing the out-of-bounds indications, but often the calculation would be correct, and it would be confirmed by other formulas. So my advice would be that if you have an out-of-bounds indication, number one, explain it to the patient, of course, and then also do the calculation using another calculation method that you have confidence in, and then see how close they are. And if the two are very close, even though you have an out-of-bounds indication, chances are you're going to have a good result. One of the interesting things about hyperopic patients, axial hyperopes, is that we often see these unanticipated myopic surprises. We might shoot for -1/4 and the patient will be -1 or -1.5. With version 3, that's reduced significantly, so that's a little bit better.
Yeah, and for us, I would use the Barrett formula, and the Olsen formula was my main formula before the Hill-RBF method. And I would also lean on the Barrett formula for my post laser refractive patients.
Yeah, I agree. And one strength of the Olsen formula, remember, all of these formulas have strengths and weaknesses. But one of the strengths of Thomas Olsen's formula is for the high hyperope with the shallow anterior chamber and the large lens thickness. Olsen seems to do a pretty nice job. So for that situation, if we have an out-of-bounds indication, I might look to Olsen as my backup formula.
Perfect. Thank you very much, both of you. I quickly have a look at the Q&A section. Looks like we are through. I also quickly browse through chat just to make sure I don't miss anything there. No new questions. So thank you, Warren. Thank you, Hadi. It was exciting to have you here again and talk to you about Hill-RBF 3.0. It's, to me, one of the biggest innovations lately in cataract surgery. And yeah, I guess we're looking forward to a very good future for cataract surgery with better improved outcomes for every surgeon around the world. And Warren already mentioned it. If you want to test Hill-RBF and if you don't have access to it through a biometric device by Haag-Streit, it's also available through the ASCRS homepage. So everybody can have a look at it, can test it, and get the experience Hadi and Warren did already have. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Okay, thank you, Thomas.
Thank you very much. Thank you.